Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Santi. If you're already here, kindly smash the like button. If you're new, kindly subscribe to the channel and support your boy. Today with me, I have George, who is not a stranger to most of you on Twitter, on Arsenal Twitter, most especially. How you doing, bro?
I'm good, bro. I'm good. I'm glad we could finally sort it. We had a little bit of technical difficulties of across the pond, so I was sorting a couple of things, but I'm glad to be here and I'm excited to talk, Arsenal in preseason. It's always a good time to be an Arsenal
Yeah,
fan in
it happens. It
preseason.
happens. There's a ritual I perform for everyone that comes to the channel for the first time, and the question is, how did you become an Arsenal fan?
Yeah, really funny story. I mean, obviously here in Canada, we don't have, soccer or football's not the most famous sport, right? So, I mean, for us, it's more difficult for people to get into, but I've always loved, football from a young kid. And my grandfather was somebody that always like introduced me to football and playing football. So from a young boy, I loved it. And, when I went to kind of the sports shop to buy my first jersey, my favorite color was red. And just because the
Okay.
sports shop would alphabetically put Arsenal was the first like red jersey that I ever saw. So, I put that on and I just continued wearing it because I really liked the color. And, that was from when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And I just continued to wear it. And that eventually became me supporting the club originally. So that is how I first started with the Arsenal jersey.
I think that's one of the most unique story I've ever heard. For a lot of people, is either one player or the other, or some got to watch the team play for the first time and got hooked from there. But you started supporting the team from red being your favorite color. I mean, that's so unique. And talking about the game yesterday, Arsenal won, Bournemouth won. We saw a lot of the academic kids in the starting lineup, and some came on in the second half. And for a manager that's been heavily criticized for, you know, his negligence of the saw Aiden Evans started yesterday, Ethan started, Lewis Kelly and Salah Eden started that game yesterday. Who was the most standout performer from you out of those kids yesterday?
I mean, I think it's hard to not talk about Ethan in general in terms of his performance. He looked the most ready. But even Miles Lewis Kelly, these are two people that I've been really high on for years. And I've been talking about how physically ready they look. I mean, there were other impressive performances from Aiden Heaven. I thought he did a really good job, at least on the ball. And he did a pretty good job against Dominic Solanke, who's not a schmuck in terms of the strike. He does give center backs quite a difficult time. So for me, he showed moments, but really you can't talk beyond the top two on everyone's list, Miles and Ethan. And I think they showed physically, those two specifically, how ready they are to compete with adults. And Miles, by the way, in a position that, okay, he's played before in the England setup, but it's not common to him. And I think in order to break into this Arsenal team, I've always predicted that he would have to come through an inverted left back role. But it's still new. It's still something that he would have to learn. And I thought he did a really good job. Bournemouth wingers aren't, you know, uh, poor. I think he did a pretty good job in general, especially physically. And then Ethan, I think, showed us some pretty special qualities, not just in terms of the cute touches, in terms of dictating the tempo, but there were moments that he went on some brilliant runs that showed this is a player that's intelligent, physical, and technically ready for the top level. So, I mean, my biggest question is how do we integrate these two talents specifically? And then in terms of the
Exactly.
others, that's another question about integration, right? But I do think those two are a step above their classmates in general in terms of being ready for the first team.
Yeah, I mean, especially Lewis Kelly going into that game yesterday, a lot of people wanted to see Ethan. And I know is a very good talent, but one person I was most curious about was Lewis Kelly, and genuinely it didn't disappoint. I was expecting him to start in midfield, but I saw him in that left back row inverting into midfield, and he didn't look out of place physically, technically, the way he was speaking his passes off the ball as well. Even though I believe he still have a lot to learn off the ball, but on the ball he's really good and looks ready for the first team. What would you think is the best plan for these guys, especially Ethan and Lewis Kelly, going into next season? Would you say a loan, or integrate them into the first team next season, considering the fact that Lewis Kelly especially would find it extremely difficult, to get minutes in our defense next season? We have 8 defenders at the club.
I think even Ethan Nwaneri will find it difficult. In terms of Mikel's ability to rotate has always been something that I think I've questioned, and his management of the squad has always been something that we look for improvement on. Period. It seems at times that Mikel almost loses trust in people, and there's times when he has certain trust in people, and it can take a while for you to gain that. And one of the biggest people who we know he's got probably the most trust in, and Martin Odegaard never is moved, is never replaced, and that's Ethan's best position. Of course, he could probably operate on the left as well. He doesn't have really an angle bias, so I think Ethan is perfectly capable operating on in the left, and so you're able to see potential there. But again, he's competing with Fabio Vieira, who we've all called for having bigger minutes and bigger usage. If you're not going to use this player and you believe he's not good enough for the first team, then you should sell him and upgrade to trust a player that you do believe in. I mean, for me, they all carry talent, but ultimately we haven't seen the rotation that makes me confident that I would see enough integration for these boys to be beneficial for their development. So the question is it beneficial to have 4 to 5 games with Mikel Arteta, which is basically 400 minutes with Mikel Arteta, or is it beneficial to have a 30 game season in the championship to sit there and actually gain experience? I think these two boys, to be honest with you, there's very little you can teach them from adult setup, because technically and physically, these boys have it. Again, they're 17. So their game isn't perfect. There are things that they can improve, both of them, Ethan and Miles. But the things that they have to improve are tactical for me. They're related to our specific game model. And I'm not looking towards too many technical improvements between them. So I'm leaning towards them staying with the first team in and around the first team environment, gaining at least 400 to 500 minutes, at least 4 to 5 games, and potentially the odd cameo appearance in the Premier League to see how they fare at least until January. And then we can reevaluate whether or not there are sufficient minutes for them in the latter half of the season, and maybe a loan in January. I don't think a loan now is useful for at least those two talents. Let's see what they can do in the 4 to 5 cameos and see if there's space in the squad, because we have the Carabao Cup games coming up, right? And the new seeding there, we could definitely see opportunities for them to at least play early rounds of the FA Cup. And then by January, when those rounds become more serious and maybe you may want to place your first team in, we can reevaluate and maybe see whether or not a loan is useful for these players to kind of continue their development. But for now, that's what I would do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of our defense, we now have 8 senior defenders at the club, and with the addition of Calafiori, obviously. And we saw Timber in that game yesterday. We saw Ben White in that game yesterday, who hasn't regressed a bit, was his usual self in that game. And Timber, surprisingly as well, was sharp, busting forward, defensively solid. How do you see us lining up next season? Because that's a massive headache for Mikel going into next season, having 8 defenders at the club. How does Calafiori come into all of this? What's so unique about this guy that he brings to the club? Like, what's that new thing that he brings to our team? Because I'm struggling to say it. The only thing I've been able to pick out so far is his ability to carry the ball from defense, to the other half of the pitch. For a club that have various profiles of center backs, also various profiles of defenders, what's so unique about Calafiori that made us go into the market and splash over 40 million on this guy?
So I think one thing is, last year, the left back position was the most rotated position in the starting 11. There was no guarantee left back starter. We were deprived of what Jurrien Timber could provide us. And that was maybe arguably forced, people might say. But fundamentally behind that, between Jakub Kiwior, between Zinchenko, between Tomiyasu and Stages, that was a position that never had a stable starter. And so I think in Calafiori, you're buying a player that absolutely comes in to offer you the aerial dominance that you like to have from a Tomiyasu, the sturdy 1v1 dueling that you have from a Tomiyasu, the progressive capacity of Zinchenko operating into midfield, the carrying into midfield, but also the passing. What people may not know is he's an incredible dictator of build-up tempo, Calafiori. He's able to lead a build-up on his own. He actually offers you flexibility as a central center back option if we needed to rest William Saliba. So for me, he comes in there and he basically gives us a strong foot or a left-footed left back that doesn't have deficiencies, but with the progressive capacity that we do need. The question becomes, what do you do with Jurrien Timber? Because people look at that spot and have basically said
Exactly.
Jurrien Timber is our left back. But on Twitter, if people have been following me, people know I love Jurrien Timber, and I have constantly talked about, for me, Jurrien Timber has capacity not just in the defensive line, but in the midfield line. I
I
really
think he's
feel,
played as a defensive midfielder at some point in Ajax.
well, he started as a number 10 in the youth
Oh,
academy
really?
and then was slowly moved back. Like his initial kind of development was a 10. That's why we see him actually so brilliant in those final third areas. He's got an eye for a pass, and really, when you look at it, what are his best qualities and analyze them? A really sharp half turn, really quick to his marker, somebody that is
Mhm.
really agile and is able to collect second balls, and somebody who is, when he is in the middle third, doesn't panic and can find both kind of passes between the lines, but also underlap really brilliantly. And also, he won't be poor in the press. He's somebody that will be a real benefit in the press in terms of hurrying people, in terms of being able to kind of collect and do the Shaka role. So for me, I see a player that's got flexibility to operate further up the pitch. I see a player that can provide us with a different option at right back as well if Ben needs a rest. I see a player for me that isn't isolated to just fullback positions. I use the term, he's our homemade Caicedo. And um, that is how I see him in terms of his flexibility in midfield. So,
Yeah, but
yeah,
with the numbers we have in defense right now, at least two of those guys, would have to go. And for me, I've, I'm I don't hate Tomiyasu, but I'm not a big fan of injury-prone players. These guys, since they came to this club, has always been struggling with injuries, and offering him that contract a few months ago just made no sense to me, to be honest. Especially when I don't know if it was already in plans to get Calafiori, but the guy is coming now, and to me also will probably be surplus to requirements because I don't see a way it starts regularly. And Zinchenko is such a unique profile. He has his own thing he brings into the team. Kivior has been struggling with consistency since he came, had a couple of few good games, and it's just been bang average for me. If we're to say two of these guys, who would you suggest?
I mean, I think definitely Zinchenko is somebody that I look at and I struggle to find his focus in this team because this is a player who has come from Manchester City to demand a starting spot and has essentially gone down the pecking order. And whether or not you want Calafiori, for me, is a little bit more of a carrier, but he also has that brilliant passing ability. And I think Zinchenko for me won't be moved on, but should be, personally. I think he is farther down the list of trusted left backs. Even last season, I think Jurrien Timber, had he been fit, would have been ahead of him. I think Tomiyasu, when fit, is ahead of him. The problem is you've got that question of when fit. So, I mean, you either sell that or you see which does he replace. I mean, I think Kivior will find it difficult to really remain in the squad with Calafiori as well. And if I'm being very honest with you, I don't know if I see a future for all three ultimately in kind of the
For
squad.
who? For who?
I think between Zinchenko, between
Oh,
Tomiyasu, and I think between Kivior, these are all players that I could see being
I
sold
think
in the
it's
next
two of
18
those
months.
three. Do you see Zinchenko working in midfield?
I've seen a lot of shouts for that, and I think it's a little bit premature because when you're operating in midfield, you need to ask yourself, are you able to receive back to goal and from contact behind and then turn? That's something that I'm not confident in Zinchenko being able to do. He's always been brilliant in terms of the game being in front of him and him arriving to the ball. In terms of him
Right.
receiving ahead of the ball, that's a very different story, and the angles are very different. So I don't really believe that that's something that we really could use. And if I was to recruit something, I would rather recruit a better profile that can receive ahead of the ball. than Zinchenko, that can operate in those zones, that also has a little bit more potency, not just as a passer, but also an output. Like when you're asking for that role, I think you can do better on the market with it. So yeah, ultimately, I think those three in the next 18 months, I don't think you can do it all right now. That would leave the squad light, but I don't see them long term being able to do it. And I think that ultimately we will need a Ben White backup at some point. There's no one in the 11 that can do a Ben White role. Jurrien Timber, when he plays at right back, he will operate in midfield. He won't provide the same overlap running power that a Ben White will. And I'm worried about that. I don't know where we find it. And if he is to go down injured, I don't think we have a player that's able to replicate that. And I think on the left, you're looking at Kieran Tierney, who is injured, who also should be going. That's another player that maybe the defense might need to
I've completely forgotten about that guy. Honestly, I moved on since last season. I moved on from him already. I see him leaving the club.
So you're looking at almost 4 players right now that we have a lot of redundancy for. And I would argue maybe 2 additions can replace those 4 in 18 months. I don't think right now, but I think in 18 months you might see a left-footed option that's more consistent on the overlap, and then a right-footed option that, again, can replace basically Tomiyasu. And I would look at Timber a little bit less as a defender. I'd look at him more in midfield that can play defense.
Right. Lastly, coming into the summer, I mean, after the game against Bayern Munich, a lot of people are saying we don't have that X factor. And to be honest, I myself was looking forward to a new recruit in midfield. I wasn't even looking forward to us getting a defender. I was looking forward to us getting a new recruit in midfield. If we're moving Partey on, then a replacement has to come in. And if we're going to use Declan Rice as a 6 going forward, then someone has to come into that left edge role that is so good on the ball that complements him, if that makes sense. And up front, Havertz has been good so far as a striker, but I honestly am not confident enough, going into the new season with him as our starting 9. There has to be someone, who is always ready to push him, to challenge him. And Eddie's not that guy. Jesus has been struggling with injuries since he came to the club, and it's not really been consistent as well. Which areas of the squad do you think we need to strengthen going into the new season? And which players do you see us, do you suggest we go for in these positions?
I mean, I think Calafiore is done, so we can assume that. And then there's another midfielder that seems to be quite linked in terms of Moreno and Fabian Ruiz recently. I think that type of player, they're both similar type of players. So between the two, whichever one you want, I think that's the type of profile that at least Mikel's looking for, a type of 6'8" that has maybe a little bit more ability to facilitate, as opposed to maybe be a really dominant output player or a really dominant number 6. I look at it as more of the Xhaka hole that they're trying to target that they never replaced of last season in that purchase. And then you need to start asking yourself in midfield, okay, how are we going to build beyond Thomas Partey? I don't think he's going to be here, and he's probably somebody that really struggles with fitness beyond just the minutes, but also moving forward. That was a starting midfielder for us, and
right.
People forget inside 18 months, we've lost Xhaka and Partey, who were crucial cogs, and we've replaced now with Declan Rice, and we need another crucial cog in midfield to join him and Martin Odegaard. And I think that we do need eventually a marquee. I don't see that being bought this season. I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't see somebody on the market that I'm very confident in that's available at the very least. I have ideas, people that I dream about, i.e. Jamal Musiala is somebody that I absolutely love that hasn't signed a contract, but I don't think he's leaving Bayern. And I don't think he's earned any interest.
Probably end up in Real Madrid or something.
Right. But I want us to compete for something like that, but I don't think he's on the market. So there's no point in kind of dreaming about that. And then I look at midfield and I look at, okay, what are the options that I can buy? For me, I don't see value in midfield. I see better value in the forward areas personally in terms of who we should target. I think people love Nico Williams, and I think that story with Barcelona is something that is going to run all summer. But but I am a big fan of Victor Osimhen as well. I think as a starting striker, a box presence, one of the biggest things that Mikel talked about in his most recent interview is box efficiency. And it's something that I've talked about on Twitter quite a bit. And I feel as though the next step for Arsenal is recruiting a marquee forward for me. And I think a lot of that depends on where you see Gabriel Martinelli best and how you'd like to fit that long term.
Because we don't know what it's bringing into the new season, because he struggled last season, and it's just crazy. There's not a lot of options on the market this summer. It's such a dry market. And I'm a big fan of Nico Williams as well, even before the Euros, and he had an amazing run at the Euros. So I think it's a no-brainer for me, having Nico Williams in the team, you know, competing with Martinelli and Trossard, or if we're going to move Trossard on or whatever. But I really see him. I really want him in the team. The midfield for me is where I'm, you know, a little bit confused. We keep getting new names every day. It was Merino, Fabian Ruiz, Zubimendi, and all of these guys. I think, like you said, I see these guys, especially Merino and Fabian Ruiz, as short-term fix. They are 28 already, and they are not that marquee signing that everybody will be looking forward to in midfield. But let's keep our fingers crossed and see what we do. You know, it's the end of the summer. We have Man United on Saturday. It will be interesting to see how we approach that game, and this will bring us to the end of the stream. I really, really appreciate you for coming, and you know, I'll see you guys on the next one.